Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Zinette Ledak, and I am a CSPC Program Committee volunteer. We would like to acknowledge that the Canadian Science Policy Conference is taking place on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial, and we respect the traditional hosts and thank them for allowing us to operate on this land. We are about to participate in an interactive panel titled Transforming Knowledge Production, organized by Laboratories Canada. I just want to say that you can tweet as much as you'd like at Science Policy with the hashtag CSPC 2022. And don't forget to fill out the evaluation survey for all the panels at CSPC. It will help us inform our decisions for next year's conference to improve. And now I will hand it over to Paul Thompson.
Great, thank you very much. Can people hear me okay? Testing. No? I think there we go. I think we're on now, we're live. Okay, good morning everyone. Really pleased to be here. My name is Paul Thompson. I'm the Deputy Minister of Public Services and Procurement for the Government of Canada, and it really is an honor and a privilege to have the opportunity to moderate today's panel. The topic today is transforming knowledge production, and specifically how scientific infrastructure and tools can support transdisciplinary collaboration. So this will be, I think, an interesting and exciting topic. We will have the opportunity to draw from experiences in Canada as well as in Germany. So maybe a little bit first, before I introduce the panel or have them introduce themselves, maybe just a little bit of background. You might wonder why Public Services and Procurement is interested in laboratories and convening a panel. So maybe I'll start there. So as a service provider to all government departments, we of course have a very active role in supporting the science-based departments, supporting them broadly in issues of procurement of scientific equipment, project management, asset management, but more specifically, we have a very exciting initiative called Laboratories Canada. I'll just say a little bit about that. It's an ambitious 25-year plan with investments to date totaling $2.8 billion. The objective is to create a world-class network of federal laboratories. It's doing so in collaboration and partnership with 15 science-based departments, so quite a network. These 15 departments have organized themselves around 5 hubs. They're thematic hubs around which there can be the very kind of transdisciplinary collaboration that we will be talking about today. The project has 4 pillars. The first is the core infrastructure, the actual bricks and mortars. So how do we build leading edge science facilities for the future? Another pillar of activity is addressing barriers to collaboration. A third one is looking beyond the bricks and mortar. What is the IM and IT capabilities that we need in laboratories to help that collaboration? And lastly, how do we go about equipping the labs for the future? So it's an exciting agenda. We're very active. There's ground being broken and facilities already in construction mode, and a whole bunch more activity that is in the design and planning stages. So really excited about that initiative, which will continue to play out for the years to come. So that's why we've got a particular interest in the science infrastructure. So maybe a little bit more on why Germany on this panel. So Canada and Germany have a rich history of science collaboration, demonstrated most recently with the establishment of the Germany-Canada Materials Acceleration Center. So this is one of many Canada-Germany partnerships led on the Canada side by the National Research Council and Natural Resources Canada. It involves 2 of the aforementioned Laboratories Canada facilities, one in Hamilton and Mississauga, and multiple locations in Germany. This Canada-Germany science collaboration has over 1,000 research projects involved within it. So Germany, as we know, is a source of inspiration on scientific collaboration generally, and there is this rich history of Canada-Germany collaboration to draw from. So that's just a little bit of context for today's panel, I would like to maybe do a very quick introduction of the panel, and turn to them to elaborate a bit more on the introduction and say a few words maybe on what they think are the opportunities presented by the panel today and why the topic is of interest. So I will start with our guest from abroad, Dr. Dominika Dolżycka, who's joined us remotely. Dominika is head of the team Sharing Resourcing at the Berlin University Alliance. So welcome to Dominika. I will turn to her in a second. We also have Francis Bilodeau, a good colleague of mine, who is the Associate Deputy Minister at Innovation, Science and Economic Development. And third, last but not least, Dr. Roseanne O'Reilly-Runte, President and CEO of the Canada Foundation for Innovation. So we've got, I think, a very interesting panel to draw from different experiences in science partnerships, in government science policy, and drawing from Dominika's experience in Germany. So I will just turn to the panel just to say a few words of introduction and maybe setting the context for today. So Dominika, I think I will turn to you first if you're ready to kick off.
Hello, and thank you for the nice introduction and the framing. I work for the Berlin University Alliance. That's an alliance with 4 partner institutions. That's the Freie Universität Berlin, Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin, Technische Universität Berlin, and Charité Universitätsmedizin Berlin. Maybe just because it's in German, there are 3 universities and a medical clinic that's associated with 2 of the universities that cooperate here. And we call it friendly competition, because now we are an alliance and these entities used to be more in competition. And what we do is we try to find solutions for cooperation and for grand challenges and for sharing. But that's just the frame from where I come from. Feel free to ask any more questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dominika, and welcome. Maybe I'll turn to Roseanne. You're very well known and CFI is well known, but do you want to say a few words of introduction?
Well, just thank you very much. And this is a great opportunity for us all to think together, because the problems that face the world are so big that no organization, no country can solve them by themselves. We need to work together. And when I was thinking about this workshop, I thought, what are the impediments to solving things together? Sometimes bureaucracies are so difficult and so complex, but we can fix that. Then I thought, well, the problems escape across borders, like the environment. They don't know about boundaries and customs. Problems just run across the borders like viruses. We need to work across borders and solve problems. We need to learn from people like our German colleagues who have wonderful, wonderful ideas. But we also have to work together with the resources that we have right here in this country. And that's why I really would like to give a kudos to Labs Canada, because when we reached out, we said, you have certain goods, you have labs, we have equipment. Universities and colleges and hospitals have people. How can we bring them all together and solve problems? And sometimes you think, oh my goodness, it costs so much to solve a problem. I think it costs even more when you don't solve it. So thank you for helping solve them.
That's great. I think you've set this up well. There are many layers to that collaboration across the federal government, with academia, with the private sector, with other countries. So lots of rich content there. Francis, do you want to say a word of introduction?
Sure, Paul. Everybody can hear me okay? Is my mic working? There you go. So as Paul mentioned, I'm the Associate Deputy Minister at Innovation, Science and Economic Development. I've been the Associate Deputy Minister since about last Christmas, and doing my best to fill the very large shoes left by the previous associate, who's 2 people over. And so I think our mandate and our mission is in the name. We're the departments that is about innovation, about science, and about economic development. And science in our modern world is at the heart of our prosperity. The challenges we face are global in nature. The challenges we face need to be solved through science and through evidence. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss with you, with all of you here. Fairly new to the portfolio, so I'm going to be looking forward to the questions and to the insights of all the members we have here. Our global landscape is actually shifting quite rapidly right now. Post-pandemic, we're seeing a realignment of geopolitical forces and a realignment of alliances, and our capacity to compete, our capacity to be leading edge, our capacity to drive science and knowledge for the purposes of both discovery and economic development, I think is going to be the key to our future prosperity as a country. So again, looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Francis. So I will come clean in that I do have some residual interest in the topic from having spent 4 years at Innovation Science and Economic Development, in addition to our current role supporting Laboratories Canada. So why don't we dive into it? So Roseanne, you've kind of set this up in a really interesting way, talking about the challenges that we face. It does seem like those challenges are increasingly complex. They face these challenges are ones the government faced, but society faces more at large, and they defy containment within boundaries. What do you think are the challenges that are the most pressing that kind of demand this transdisciplinary collaboration to solve? How do you identify them? How do you prioritize them? Any thoughts on the whole array of challenges we face, and how do we focus on and identify the ones that are most pressing?
Having consulted across the country quite broadly, everyone agrees that we really have to focus on some grand challenges. Everybody also agrees that we need to have priorities and we can't do everything at once. On the other hand, we can't say we're only going to support research in this area and the other area is going to lie fallow and we're not going to develop it. Because if we did that, we might say, all right, we're going to work on vaccines and we're going to leave artificial intelligence aside, and artificial intelligence will help with the development of the vaccines and their use. So we need a plan, but we don't need a straitjacket. And so there's that art of getting it right. How are we going to accept grand challenges, but keep the door open for others? And at the CFI, we do a delicate dance, and the dance starts with excellence. We look at excellence across the country in the research that's going on. And then after that, all of the top excellent projects go into a competition where we say, and how is that going to help Canada and the world? And it's at that level that there are priorities picked so that everyone has a chance to participate, yet we do focus on certain challenges. Right now, across the world, probably everyone would agree that the environment is a great challenge. But when you talk about the environment, it actually includes health. It includes the environment. It includes the economy. If people are starving, they're not going to worry about what tree they cut down. So we have to actually consider that even some of these grand challenges have multiple aspects and need to involve everyone. So what we do at the CFI is we think of ourselves as type O donors. You know, when you have type O blood, you can give to everybody. And so we consider ourselves those donors that allow that basic platform to exist so the future can build upon it. 20 years from now, we'll know if we're right or wrong.
That's a great analogy. I think we should come back to a little bit more on the how you actually do that. Why don't we turn to Dominica? What are your thoughts on identifying and prioritizing grand challenges facing society and government?
Well, in the Berlin University Alliance, our first objective is to work on grand challenges, and the first two grand challenges have been decided on top-down, and that the first one was social cohesion and the second one global health. So they kind of fit to what has just been said. But the next grand challenge is a very interesting way it's going to be picked. It's going to be picked in cooperation between society and science. We have a 4-step program involving young researchers, students, and school students to find topics and then to propose joint projects they would like to work on. These will be picked from by the universities and the alliance partners to ensure that there's enough know-how for these to work on these topics within the alliance. And the research will be done conjointly by the groups formed of society and the scientists from the alliance. So that's one approach, but it needs new formats. Definitely new formats have to be found, and that's one we have developed.
Great, thanks for that. Francis, when you think of this from a government policy perspective, what are your thoughts on identifying and prioritizing grand challenges from a policy perspective?
Maybe I'll take a step back and then enter into that question. I guess as a first premise, I would say it's useful, maybe somewhat controversial to say fields of study are actually an artificial construct. They're one that we've created, and they're a useful construct because they allow us to specialize, they allow us to push knowledge, and as the amount of knowledge, as the amount of data, as fields become increasingly complex, we actually are becoming increasingly specialized. But the problems we face aren't siloed. They aren't divided along fields of study, around sectors of research. They are right now important challenges, and a number of them are actually existential challenges for us. Things like climate change. We saw it with the pandemic, with the growth of population in the world, global sort of travel, challenges that used to be and issues that maybe used to be more localized now become global very, very quickly. So the capacity to mobilize around solving for problems is a super important one, and one that's important for all of us, one that's important globally, one that we need to partner on. And so Grand Challenges allows us to focus in, identify problems, and then bring in the best brains and the best capacities to help solve them. So as a construct, they're incredibly powerful, incredibly useful, and I think will be part of how we look to solve the world's challenges as we go forward. So I've talked about the climate change, I've talked about the pandemic, but also we're seeing sort of rapid change of technology. And so we're trying to get our heads around what does AI mean for the world? The technology is advancing at such a fast pace. We also need people who are doing the best thinking around what are the good applications, how do we use it, how do we leverage it, and how do we leverage it for good? And so we are at a place of very, very rapid change, very rapid innovation globally. And challenges, in my mind, are one way we can focus in and bring the best possible people to drive solutions for the benefit of society generally.
That's great. So that's a little bit on the what. I'd like to kind of shift the conversation into the how we make this all happen. In particular, what we can do to enable collaboration. So how do we plan the infrastructure? And when I say infrastructure, I mean much beyond the bricks and mortar, the soft infrastructure as well, the relationships, the governance, the partnerships. How do we leverage all of that to advance the collaboration? Maybe we'll start with the Canadian context a bit. Roseanne, you've been delving into this quite in depth. So your thoughts on how you set the conditions for success for that kind of collaboration.
Yeah. So we set the conditions by asking people to apply not individually, but as a team. And we don't ask for one leader, we ask for co-leaders, which means there's already diversity at the top of the team. And then I asked staff to look back and see how many team members were actually from different disciplines. And we couldn't find any team in the last 10 years that wasn't interdisciplinary already.
100%.
So more and less, but there was always some reach across disciplines. And what we did in our last strategic plan was say transdisciplinary thinking is, Francis is an engineer and I'm not. And I'm going to take a course in engineering and he's going to take a course in literature. And you know, at the end, I'll be confused and not able to build a bridge. And he'll probably be able to recite the Iliad in Latin or Greek. But there you go. So there's transdisciplinarity, but we decided that we would take the word convergence because what's really important is not well, it is important that everybody has a course in science and understands something, but when you get to doing research and trying to move an agenda forward, you want specific talents to come together at specific points to solve a problem and then move away. And that's called convergence. So we want to be able to have researchers converge on a theme, assemble, do it, and then move to another theme. So how do we support that convergence? Partly through sharing equipment, partly through little top-ups to grants. If more than one institution is working together, we provide additional funds to facilitate that. So we have suggestions, we have public relations that we do to encourage this whole thing to happen. And it is happening, and it is happening organically. In the last major science initiative competition that happened this summer, without anybody saying a word, 50% of the organizations that won have environment as the key functioning. So they are looking at environment, climate change, clean energy as a topic. When you look at internationalization, because we have to look beyond that, we look to find out how many of our teams included international representatives. 65% of all the teams include people from different countries. So this is happening organically. And I think that the next step is, if organically is good and it's bubbling along and happening, but if we were more purposeful and tried to build something from it, as with our colleagues from Germany now, where we talk about, all right, our researchers are working together, but how can we help them do even more? How can we make something even better happen from this? That's where it's kind of purposeful and not just an organic collaboration. So that's what I would like to see. And you know, I looked at the project with Helmholtz and Labs Canada and NRC, and I thought, oh, this is so wonderful. And then I looked back to see what we were doing at the CFI, and my goodness, we had 34 researchers leading teams, which included 340 researchers doing 39 projects around what you had funded. So, you know, we contributed another $51 million. We didn't know that. I hadn't
It was
looked
organic,
at those
as you're saying.
Exactly. So, and you were doing things, and Germany was doing things. How, if we sit down together and put this together, can we make the sum be greater than all the individual parts?
Francis, any thoughts in the Canadian context, how we can work on that convergence or that more purposeful collaboration?
Sure, and I guess the first thing I would say, again, being fairly new to the field, I was sitting down a few weeks ago with a group of university presidents, and I was telling them, well, you know, our analysis shows we need more partnership. We need more partnership between universities and private sector. That was a mistake because I ended up getting a very, very long list of how there's existing sort of partnerships between private sector and public sector and how that is actually happening already. Where I sit from, and I mean, a large part of what my department does is act as a funder. And how we do that matters. And how we do that and how we work with you and with others to set some priorities, to act as a convening role, as a convener, but also to fund networks and partnerships and incentivize that, I think matters. Some of the places, and without sort of, Roseanne spoke eloquently to some of the areas where CFI plays, but more and more we're seeing a lot of our programs focusing on networks. So for example, we have the Global Innovation Clusters, and they're around AI, they're around manufacturing. But the entire purpose and nature of those is to build collaborative networks, is to build platforms, whether they be infrastructure, collaboration platforms, governance, that work together and bring people together to make sure that we're bringing in the expertise, the capacities from public sector researchers, private sector researchers, to drive towards areas where Canada has a potential advantage. And we're seeing that in other programs. One of our big flagship programs is the Strategic Infrastructure Fund. And typically that has been a program that has been primarily around investment attraction, funding sort of big manufacturing plays, et cetera. But newer in that program is also a network and collaborative component. So more and more, I think, and it's partly from where I sit, we are in large part a funder and a convener, but more and more there's a premium and an emphasis put on collaboration, put on networks, put on cross-disciplinary efforts.
No, that's great. It'd be interesting to think what are the opportunities we have to be more purposeful on these nodes of collaboration, whether it's the global clusters or whether Laboratories Canada, lots of opportunities out there, so that it's not simply organic, that we can actually make it more of a purposeful endeavor. Dominique, I'm gonna turn to you maybe to share more of the German experience here on the how you go about facilitating that collaboration and sharing some of the resources that we can't afford to duplicate over every little niche area of science. Do you wanna pick that up?
Yes, thank you. And when listening to Francis and Roseanne, I noticed that the strategies are pretty similar. We have networks that are being built and they come together for specific purposes, and we need consortia and projects led by different PIs or a consortium for PIs. And I would like to give two examples. One example of a program is by the German Research Foundation, that is the central governing research foundation organization in Germany. And the Berlin University Alliance is the first alliance that's being funded within the line of excellence strategy, one of the main funding lines here. So here, cooperation and friendly competition are brought together to fight the grand challenges, to find solutions for sharing resources. And another one that is very interesting is the recent development. It's the NFDI, it's a Nationale Forschungsdateninfrastruktur. It's a nationwide initiative for cooperation. And here, it's the topic of research data management that has to be tackled in Germany. And to go about it, to stop finding little small solutions, there has been a nationwide program where only consortia can apply. And these consortia can be from universities or non-university research centers, but even research groups that are funded, or NGOs or commercial companies can be part of these consortia. And what they have to do is they have to work on a very specific challenge in the domain of research data management that the community they work in faces, and they have to find solutions from within the community, because research data management is very community specific. And I would like to give one example. One of these consortiums is FAIRMAT. That's a consortium led by Professor Claudia Draxel from the Humboldt-Universität in Berlin. And the aim is to set up an infrastructure that helps making material science data fair, that is findable. And here, 60 PIs from 34 different German institutions work together. It's like universities or scientific societies like the German Society for Physics, or networks that come together, as well as grad schools. So that's very, very different players who work here together. Yeah, that's nationwide, and the topics are open. It's a very open format, and there will be 26 consortia that will be funded, or some of them are already being funded, and they can have funding for up to a period of 10 years.
Thank you for that. Those are rich examples, and those are really helpful to share. Maybe coming back to the Canadian context, if you look ahead, Roseanne, what do you think the models need to shift? Is there more we need to do to think about incentivizing collaboration and moving, in your words, maybe moving from that organic approach into a more purposeful approach?
Well, I think we talked a little bit about, the grand challenges, the problems which bring us all together. And if you imagined a graph, they would be the up and down columns on the graph. But the graph starts somewhere across the base that supports all the research, whether it's research for the grand challenges that we have today or the ones we're going to have tomorrow. And, if we took something across the base that affects absolutely everybody in this room, every researcher in the country, every research team around the world, it's data. And we're going to have more and more of it forever, I think. I shouldn't go as far as to say forever, but quite a while, data is going to be a growing issue. Finding the data, accumulating the data, processing the data, classifying it, analyzing it, and then making it usable. This is a problem that is not just in one lab, it's across the country. It's a problem that affects us from one province to another. It's a problem that affects us internationally. If globally we could come to a way where we could agree on certain standards, on certain classification tools and certain methodologies, even just for medicine or for specific fields within it. But if we looked at this sort of global issue of data and how we handle it and manage it, that would be something that would help every single researcher and every researcher in every single field. And it would be a way that we could all move forward. It's extremely difficult, extremely complex, because there are different kinds of machines, different ways of looking at data. But if we could start, and even as two countries get together and start sharing, it's like translating a language, but this is translating the data methodology. It would be really wonderful. And I'm going to just add, can I add one more thing?
Absolutely.
So when we went across the country asking researchers what bothered them, they said data. And when we asked them, what would you like to be known as? Okay, top nuclear physicist, top precision medicine, whatever. But then when you say, okay, but what would it be for the whole country? You know what they said? We would like to be known as the ethical researchers in the world, those that have ethical values. The ethical values, and I'm glad that Francis mentioned it, driving artificial intelligence, have to drive data. They have to drive every field. If we could lead, just like there was the Montreal Declaration on ethics and values in artificial intelligence, if we could lead in doing that, it would be absolutely wonderful. And Canada really can't do something like that alone. It really has to be something that grows internationally. And that is a project that actually doesn't cost money. It actually costs brain power and it costs our hearts, but it's important. And if you lie the basic exchange of information, which is the data, and how and why and what we share, which is the ethics, we have really built the foundation that will allow all of the grand challenges to come forward and be solved. It sounds simple, doesn't it?
Indeed. No, it's interesting. On the question of data, when we think about our Laboratories Canada project, one of the most prominent and pressing needs is on the data side. Not that the bricks and mortar is easy, but the data side is particularly challenging. The astounding requirements for terabytes of data storage, data analytics capability, it's huge. And that plus the ethical dimension you're talking about both introduce transdisciplinary skill sets that are needed to advance it. You're getting into the social sciences with the ethical side, and you're getting maybe out of the core scientific expertise into data capabilities on the other. So those are really good examples of how capabilities really need to come together. Francis, thoughts on enabling the kind of collaboration that we're talking about across disciplines?
Well, I mean, I can't help but double down on the data point. So for people's context, in a previous job, I was the CIO for the Government of Canada. And as part of that—
We all carry some of our previous jobs with
we
us.
we do. And there was a technology component to that, but there was also sort of the legislation around that and the Privacy Act. In the current role, I'm also responsible for PIPEDA, so the Privacy Act for the government, PIPEDA for the rest, for private sector. And I gave a speech a while back, and I'm going to get this wrong, but about the rapid pace of acceleration of data. And it was something like, in the last 3 years, more data has been created than in the history of the world before. And the logic of that is, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. There was a time where data and the information we had was built by an individual in a place, usually an expert. Then we democratized that partly through the internet. We removed the place notion. And so people all around the world were now contributing in various ways to data. And then we partly removed the person from that, where machines are now the ones creating the data. And machines are then analyzing the data created by machines. And so there's a huge amount of richness and information that has never existed in the history of the world before. And so that brings us here. But our tools and our capacity to process that is woefully lacking in most cases. And I'll speak for the Government of Canada in any case. And the issue of standards is at the heart of it. So we have all this untapped sort of information and knowledge that we can't draw from and we can't draw insights from because we haven't necessarily caught up with the standards, with the rules governing how, and with the practices that'll allow us to untap that. And so layering of technology, layering of leveraging data, I think is just an incredible opportunity for Canada. I think we actually have more expertise in that field than in a lot of places. Around ethical AI, we are a global leader in that space. We have some of the sort of greatest minds in that space, and that's creating an advantage. And so I'm not answering Paul's question directly. I just felt like doubling down on data because it's a topic that interests me. But I think de facto our capacity to leverage it and share that data will mean and will drive collaboration across multiple fields because data in itself doesn't sit or reside in just one field.
Very good. I was going to dive a bit more into how we design and run competitive processes. You spoke a bit about this already, Roseanne, but any more thoughts on how competitive processes can be structured to maximize the kind of collaboration we're looking for? Any CFI experiences or insights you can share on where we might go on that front?
Well, the competitive process at the CFI always includes collaboration and partnerships. And when we were founded with the principle that the federal government would give us 40-cent dollars, which is a bargain for the federal government. However, it is a brilliant idea. And I say that because I once was on the other side of this saying, oh, we have to find 60%. Now, we got a great present. We got 40% of the way there, and now we have to find 60%. But actually, it drove the researchers and the institutions harder. But it also made the research facilities be not something that the federal government dropped down. It was something that was shared by the province. It was shared by the industry. It was shared by other institutions. So it meant that research belonged to the people. I'm going to give you a corny story, but I went to visit Western. I took the plane. I got off the plane. There's a taxi driver, and I always talk to taxi drivers. And he just came to Canada not too long ago. And where was I going? I gave him the address. Oh, he said, I know where that is. That's Windy. That's the facility that. And he immediately started describing all that that facility did in actually broken English. He knew more about the facility than I did. And when we got there, he said to me, and you want to know what? My son is going to go to this university, and my son is going to be a scientist, and he's going to work in that facility because it's going to change the world. And I think to myself, some days the data is way over there, the problems are extraordinary, but it's those individual people that are going to be touched and changed and part of creating a better world for the future. So how do we do it? Part of it is by making everybody work at it. Nobody gets the whole pie. Everybody gets a piece of the pie, and they have to put it together and decide whether it's what kind of pie it is.
Francis, anything, like you mentioned the global clusters as a focal point. There's other instruments that I said. As you think about the design and future of those programs, what comes to mind for you?
Sure. So I'll talk to design a little bit in some of the initiatives, and Paul, as you mentioned, more and more collaboration, sort of a hallmark and a requirement for all our programs. I guess I'm speaking a lot of anecdotes. If I was having a conversation with a head of an organization, which we fund, and we set up a competition, and a number of these heads of organizations now have to compete for funds. And part of the feedback to me is how can you tell us that we need to collaborate more on one hand and ask us to compete on the other hand? And so they saw a tension there. And I have to say, I think that the absence of competition over time actually leads to less collaboration because it leads to sort of entrenched positions or entrenched expectation. So competition in a way and incenting collaboration in the context of those competition is actually important to be able to bring in the best and incentivize those competing to bring in the top expertise and build those bridges of collaborations. But how we design the initiatives and the fact that the initiatives have to incent broad-based collaboration as opposed to winner-take-all type of mentality is important. And so we talked about the clusters, but we also see it in things like the biomanufacturing and life science strategy, where we expect hubs to be transdisciplinary. And we will see it more and more as a function of our program and as a function of the mindset. People may know here, we are working with Roseanne and others, looking at the granting agencies and how to collaborate and doing a review there. And part of the impetus is we want to make sure, and I mean, they're well-functioning organizations, effective organizations, but what we want to have a conversation about is how do we ensure that we aren't creating silos and we are incenting collaboration? Because as we said earlier, the problems of the world are not siloed. And so our institutions, our incentives, and our programs can't incentivize this siloization of information or of talents.
That's great. Dominique, any thoughts from a German perspective on how we ensure competition promotes collaboration and not fragmentation of?
Well, I have some ideas that take it a little bit further, even maybe that we need a culture change. We come from a world where what was focused on disciplines, and at least in Germany, our funding and our assessment of excellence is usually discipline specific. So if you have an application for funding, there will be persons coming from a certain discipline, from the discipline, and they'll have to assess how good the application is. And now we are more and more going in the direction of interdisciplinary or even transdisciplinary research. And we have to have top-down structures that help this to develop. We need to have funding lines for transdisciplinary, and interdisciplinary is quite normal now, research, but we also need to have incentives for the researchers who go in that way, because and transdisciplinary research with people who are not researchers takes more time. You have to take people from the society. Your research will take longer. You will have less papers produced in the same amount of time. And still, the papers are the currency for a good scientific career. So we have to help here. We have to change standards. We have to have transdisciplinary engagement as a value that is also recognized in the research world and in the assessment. So we need a change within the science, how you to involve more other disciplines or the society, but we also need a change in the funding itself that will answer questions like, how do we value this collaborative research and science policy? What funding design do we propose, and how do we reward persons, individuals who go there and try it? Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for that. I think that culture change element is indeed an important point. Last area that I was going to explore, maybe it's a little bit self-serving when we think about our Laboratories Canada initiative. I mentioned it's a 25-year strategy looking out. Individual projects often have a timeline of 5 to 10 years. And when we think about things like the bricks and mortar, about the IMIT capabilities, about equipment, about design, how do we future-proof those kinds of investments to make sure that they're resilient and going to serve us into the future? There's even more change recently, like the COVID experience, I think, has been an inject of different considerations on how we collaborate. It's facilitated more networking capability, the explosion of Zoom and MS Teams, but also how people come into physical facilities with more purposeful interaction in mind, not just as a place to work, but as a place to collaborate. So all this just makes me think we have got to be awfully careful in how we think about these long-term investments to make sure they're future-proofed. Any thoughts to share on that? It's a bit of a crystal ball question, but.
I wish I were the Sphinx and I'd tell you the real answer. But I think the very best that we can do is to create the best base foundation that we can build today that enables the research today. We need to build the idea of sustainability into our programs. That's one of our pillars in our strategic plan right now. We have always said people could update and renew and upgrade and fix their equipment, but people never believed that. They all thought that, CFI only wants shiny new things. So we're actually going to remind people and that you can renew the equipment you have and make it last longer. Anything that we can do to make it sustainable and save money and save the environment and build on it for the future is really good. So, yes, we're going to work on that. And that's a goal that we can all have. When researchers ask for their equipment and make requests, we're going to ask them, how will this be sustainable? When your project is over, what else could it be used for? What will be the future use of this equipment? Because that becomes important, and it's the researchers that know how it can be used in the future. So we have that base of sustainability that's building in, and it's coming bigger and bigger in our consciousness. We also have the collaboration, and when we work with Labs Canada, and you have spaces, and researchers and institutions come with equipment, that partnership is a stronger base for building a long-term future, because we've put not only and invested a small thing, but it becomes a bigger investment in a long-term future. And I think that when government and universities and researchers and hospitals and colleges, when we all, and industry, we almost forgot, and not-for-profits, we mustn't leave them out. When we all sit down and talk together, we're going to build something that is more sustainable and more viable long-term in the future, because it will take into account more different points of view.
Very good. Dominika, any thoughts on future-proofing investments from a German perspective?
I think they coincide very well and go with the suggestions Rosanne made. I think it's needed. There is multiple layer approach needed, one that is bottom up, coming from the scientists. And it's not only invest in one large equipment, but you also have the scientists working on the cutting edge scientific questions with the cutting edge technologies. And you don't always have to buy a new one. You can go and invest with little investments to improve the use of it. Like, for example, for microscopy, you could invest into the better innovation of preparation of probes. So you always have the possibility to prolong the usage by investing into the I'll just put it around the equipment, but you also need to invest in the new generation of researchers that will propagate and innovate with the technologies and the equipment. But you also need to have the funding policies that help here, as discussed before, that push the scientific institutions into the collaborations or the transdisciplinarity, or have the reward systems that are needed for this kind of research.
Very good. And last word on this to Francis.
So maybe a few thoughts. I mean, certainly, I think people have touched on the notion of planning. I think there's a tendency in terms of how we fund things to want to fund things one and cut the nice ribbon. I think we need to be thinking about life cycle. And this hasn't just been an issue sort of in the research infrastructure sphere. This is sort of a realization that happened in infrastructure generally. People who will remember maybe 10 years ago, we were talking about massive infrastructure deficits in municipal infrastructure. There is a tendency to invest, cut a ribbon, and then not invest in the maintenance. And so the shift to thinking about funding on a life cycle basis is really important. And that doesn't always come easily in our systems. Investments in infrastructure, and this is, maybe not what people focus in on, but like are from an accrual perspective, and so from a budget perspective, actually not that expensive for government. But then the costs of the equipment in it are real costs and sort of depreciate right away and off the books right away. So there's a thing we need to think about how we fund. We are actually fairly lucky in Canada. We have major research facilities that are leading edge. We have the Canadian Light Source, which is Canada's synchrotron. We have Snow Lab. We have the Ocean Networks Canada's facilities. We have NRC facilities. We have these existing facilities that are great, but we need to keep investing in them, and we need to think about ensuring that they're maximizing their use. The other point maybe I'd touch on is the role of partnership, and in some instances, partnership with the private sector. So I was visiting not so long ago C2MI over in Bromont, which is an interesting facility where research is being done primarily by Sherbrooke, but in partnership with IBM and Teledyne, and they share a facility. And the fact that there's multiple partners, investors, and users of this means that funding is actually coming from a variety of sources, and means that that the facility gets a fair amount of profile through a number of different players. So thinking about how we partner around different actors in society is also potentially an area where we could do more.
Can't disagree with you on life cycle cost. You've taken a song out of my songbook here at Public Services and Procurement. That's a critical guiding principle for sure. So that's great. That concludes the areas that I wanted to probe with our panelists. I think I'm going to call on Dan McPhee maybe to help with moderating a Q&A session with the audience. So Dan, are you ready to help with that?
Hello. Hi, everybody. Okay, we have one question right off the top.
That was easy.
I like to get the ball started. Yes, my name is Sandra Lapointe, and I'm a professor at McMaster University. I'm also the director of the collaborative. When I think about the challenges around transdisciplinarity, I think about it from the standpoint of someone who's really interested in building skills for transdisciplinarity. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, is there something that universities need to do in order to be able to better prepare researchers who are going to participate in these transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary endeavors? And I'm thinking maybe even more specifically about the fact that the kind of challenges that we're seeking to address are ultimately social challenges. We want to resolve these challenges because they directly affect humans and society. And they require the social science and humanities, as Paul mentioned, to be part of this and be not just a mere afterthought. They need to be integrated to these projects from the get-go. So when you're thinking about the capacity of the researcher to contribute to an interdisciplinary project, and an interdisciplinary project that truly brings social science, humanities, and the hard sciences together to address these challenges, what's your wish list, or what do you want to see changed?
I think that's an excellent question, and I was thinking about that very point as well. And I'm not as close to the day-to-day anymore, but I have talked to some university presidents lately, and I do see this pretty profound change in appreciation for transdisciplinary work. Examples of how like data analytics are starting to get embedded in social science programs, and there's just this kind of convergence that Roseanne was talking about, which is maybe contributing to some of that organic movement that you were talking about earlier. But Roseanne, do you want to start on that one?
This is so much fun. Because I've always thought that this was a really great topic. And I recently read an article about transdisciplinary studies, and it's about Guelph and about a kind of a capstone course that they do that creates that. For many years, universities have had requirements for courses, and then the requirements disappeared, and then you had to do all engineering and no humanities, and then they put them in buckets. So there are all kinds of experiments that have gone on about how you do this. But I've got two things. One is 20 years ago, I was president of a university in the States, and I said, every single student in the university should share a common experience, and that common experience should have every single discipline involved, so that no matter how focused their studies are, they've had something together. And the faculty picked the topic of the environment, and we actually had law and the environment, biology, engineering, arts, music, everybody. The chapters were extraordinary. And they published a book and ran the course for a number of years and then actually they switched topics and changed it to other topics. But that whole idea of a course that involved everybody, that you could see that every discipline touched on something, is really helpful. I really think that's a great thing. The other thing is structurally, in one university that I was at, I was able to persuade some angel investors to give us money so that we could embed in every discipline individuals who knew how to do simulation. So we had people doing modeling and simulation in every single subject, whether it was business or arts or engineering. And we were able at any time to bring together a team of people who had experience in every different field to do an interesting project. That kind of thing is really interesting. Breaking down the silos where you have, all the engineers in one area and all the arts people in another area, where they get together and talk. If you go to CERN in Switzerland, the labs are all quiet. Hush, everybody's working. At lunchtime, this bell rings and they all run down to this giant cafeteria, and the sound is deafening. All the ideas, people talking and exchanging ideas. So they talk about the atoms colliding. I think it's ideas and people that have to collide. So we need, in a sense, the spaces where that will happen. We need the structures in our academic programs. We need the possibility for students and faculty to reach across the disciplines. And that could be so innovative in so many different ways. And I just interviewed, I think, the top 100 innovators in science across the country. And every single one of them said they at some point took a class in the arts and it made them think differently. And that was part of what made them be innovative. So, there's a little key there that we can all maybe put in the door.
That's great. I've also noted bigger, better cafeterias for
Yeah,
the labs
there you go.
candidates. It seems.
And better food too.
Nutritious food. Either any of the other panelists want to get on that one?
Can I just follow up?
Yeah.
What you're describing,
I think you're going to need the microphone just for a second, so that Dominica can hear you.
Test.
What you're describing is what an individual needs to do to be able to open their mind to work in an interdisciplinary setting. What I'm thinking about is the skills to collaborate in an interdisciplinary settings, which are different and which everybody needs to do all the things. And so, I mean, obviously, I'm thinking beyond transdisciplinarity, but how is there a lack there? Or, I mean, is this something that you're noticing, or is this something that is not really a concern in creating the transdisciplinary space and projects that you're creating?
Dominica, do you want to weigh in on skills for collaboration?
Yeah, thank you. I have one skill that I think is very important. It's from my own biography because I come from economy and then I did a PhD in psychology. And I also see it very much within the collaborative projects within the Berlin University Alliance. And that's the skill of understanding other scientific languages. As I came as an economist into the psychology department, I hardly understood anything because I didn't know the language they spoke. So I think one very important skill is to learn beside the language of the own scientific community, to have the possibility, and these might be spaces like Roseanne suggested, where students from different disciplines have the possibility to cooperate and to find a common language. And it should not be underestimated how difficult it is to find a common sense of a word, specific word like cohesion, when you're coming from different disciplines, from chemistry and sociology, for example. And I think another very important skill is the skill to work with data science, because as we've talked about earlier, data science-driven work is becoming more and more important. And here, the persons from different disciplines may work together to learn. That's a very good field for experiments in this area too. Thank you.
Great. Maybe I think there's some other questions, so maybe we should move on. We've got another one in the audience.
Thank you. Wonderful discussion. My name is Olga Peña. I am from the Public Health Agency of Canada. One part that resonates from this discussion quite well to me is incorporating life cycle management into the sustainability approaches of the devices overall. One point that was brought into the attention is to incorporate like maintenance and fixing of the devices when they're not working well, or instead of just applying for more funding to bring the latest of these devices. But I wonder if within the strategies considered has been brought into the attention of how we can also collaborate with low and middle income countries to expand these devices as well that may not be, in good functioning position just to fix them, and hopefully collaborate with scientists in low and middle countries that also need of these high technologies. The reason I'm saying that is because, again, I am originally from Colombia. I was a PhD here in Canada, and I also saw, thanks to CFI funding, we were able to have wonderful research on genomics and so on with the latest technologies. But then once the equipment was no longer in use, it was just on the hallway. And that was just, breaking my heart seeing that every day, knowing that back home, many scientists were dying for the equipment of this type. So that's...
Roseanne, thoughts on optimizing the use of equipment?
When equipment is no longer usable, it belongs to the university, and the university is supposed to dispose of it in an environmental way, give it to schools, give it to other countries. A lot of universities have programs where they do take the used computers that are no longer up to date and are sharing them. So I think probably we have to make some kind of what do you call it, a sharing of ideas thing where people can take each other's ideas of how to do that to inspire each other. But it can be done, and once the equipment belongs to the institution, it's been installed and the research is done, that's the institution's prerogative. So talk to your institution.
Very good. You good on that?
I mean, what a
Just
great
before
point.
the
I don't
next
have much to
question.
add to what Roseanne says, but I think it's a bit of a call for us collectively to do more. What a shame to have equipment that could be useful and isn't. I'm just going to weigh in a little bit on the earlier one around skills for collaboration. I'm probably the least equipped to speak to that in the university context, but so I will provide some gratuitous comments that I don't think that interdisciplinary collaboration is something that you do after your postdoc or that you learn later. I think it has to be built into the fabric of how we do things. So I'm bringing my own experience spending a long time in government, and we do work ourselves in silos and have to sort of, I mean, we have scientists across government, we have disciplines within government, but the reflex to be able to work transdisciplinary isn't just about skills, it's about knowing the people, and it's about, I think Dominica mentioned, knowing the language. My wife works in healthcare, I'm an engineer that works in government. To speak to each other about our own fields, we have to learn sort of the language that is used in each other's sectors. And so I think it's something you learn by doing, and that we should be making sure we do all throughout. And in a university setting, and I will defer to people here, I think we should also be looking at faculty and whether they are themselves modeling and encouraging that. And I think that would flow into universities. So anyways.
Very good. We have a question on the floor.
Hello, Jack Danda. I'm from Canadian Food Inspection Agency, one of the beneficiary for Lab Canada and partner in that project. The pandemic has taught us the human health, animal health, and the ecosystem environment interaction is so important, and building infrastructure and research in that space. While we are proposing that we should be working more and more collaboration, which is the right thing to do because the expertise lies not just with one organization in government, it's in academia, in private sector, and internationally as well. Sometimes the challenge comes when you are dealing with some highly pathogenic agents, and also making sure that they are handled safely and securely, including the data side and how the information is shared. While we don't want to impede the collaboration, I was wondering a question to the panelists, like what sort of policy instruments and things which can put in place so that the progress is there, ensuring that we are step ahead working on more preparedness and prevention rather than being reactionary, and also make sure that safety, security of data and those agents is there. Thank you.
An excellent question. The guardrails on security are quite critical, I think, as a design principle for any of the collaboration we do. This has been a major area of focus for ISID. Anything you want to say, Francis, about that?
I mean, I think it's an excellent point. I mean, I think if I understood correctly, I think there's two parts to the question, which is a little bit like there are elements of capabilities and capacity and knowledge that we need to build in Canada, and I think the pandemic actually laid some of those bare, where there are areas where we need to think about our own capacities nationally to make sure that it's there when we need to call upon them. There's an element of safety and security of data, which, you know, in current dynamic, there has been a lot of conversation around, you know, securing IP, securing data, making sure that some elements stay in country. I would say that applies to a limited number of fields. It's not in every field. So there's broad swaths of areas where we think and where data and information and knowledge should flow absolutely freely. There's other areas that are more sensitive, and so we have been looking at sort of the guidelines and working with granting agencies and others to think about what those guidelines should be. But I don't know, Roseanne, if you have anything to expand on that.
You're the expert on that one. We're all in an evolving situation. The world changes every day. Sometimes I'm really glad it does, and other times I wish that we could have stayed in yesterday a little bit longer. So as we try and plan for the future, we all try and do the best. And we take advice from experts in security, experts in the security of laboratories as well. And we rely on our government to provide a leadership for us to head us in the right direction for the day after tomorrow.
Yeah, I think awareness of those really important guardrails is critically important, and getting the word out to the scientific community. Not only that they understand the rule set, but also the why. I think it's not about blind compliance. I think people need to understand the risk landscape as well to kind of buy into the model. Maybe we'll do one last question. I think we're approaching. We got a question up in the front here. We need a microphone. Oh, sorry. I can't see behind the podium. Sorry about that.
First time I'm seeing you too. Thank you. I'm Max King. I'm on a youth advisory council to Dr. Mona Niemer. And thank you, Dominika, as well. Vielen Dank für Ihre Forschung. Publishing in German, in Germany, science is highly encouraged, and a lot of scientists publish both their work in German and in English for the international community. Can Canada learn any lessons with that in publishing both in English and in French and encouraging translation of all science into that? Dominika, maybe I'll ask you for that.
So maybe I'm just going to interject here. I'm going to take the second question here too, just because I kind of promised maybe we'll do two questions at once, and then I'll turn to the panel to wrap it up.
IVADO's Institute of Data Valorization. So we talk a lot about the skills necessary to work in an interdisciplinary environment. So as you said, those skills are often acquired like on the field, and then they're not recognized by a diploma. And this is a challenge then to valorize those skills when working with in an academic environment. So do you have any suggestion to solve that problems? Thank you.
Okay, very good. We've got two last questions, then one to Dominika on the challenges of working in different languages, and then one on collaboration skills. So Dominika, to you.
Thank you, Max, for the question. Well, it's very interesting. I'm learning because in my view, from my personal experience within the Alliance and within my work in economics and psychology, I've noticed that there is less and less publication in German, but most publications are in English. So maybe at student level, there will be some German, but the further you come up the ladder, the more it's just English. Of course, if you have language-related publications that might be different, I would not like to contradict you, but just report from my own experience that actually we are not, I have the feeling in Germany, we are not in a comfortable situation where we have the major scientific language as our own. So maybe that's why we have still two languages, but as far as I can see, the whole Berlin University Alliance is English oriented. So I'm awfully sorry, I cannot give you good reasons because, yeah. That's not what I see.
Thank you, Dominika, for sharing that. And last thoughts on the skills question?
I mean, I think the question was, are horizontal skills undervalorized and under-credentialed, I guess. I don't know that I have a solution to that. And maybe you do, that'd be great to hear. But I think the notion of interdisciplinary in the research and then the capacity to get things done is something that across disciplines is something that is, at least from my perspective, from the government perspective, increasingly asked for. And so my assumption is that as more and more work gets done interdisciplinary, that'll be more and more sought out. But to the question of, is it under-credentialed or under-recognized, I guess the question is by who, and probably by the academic society more than by government. So I don't know that I have sorry, I don't have a clear answer on that one, unfortunately.
Okay, so I think we'll leave it there. This has been a really rich discussion. Maybe just hit on a few highlights that jumped out at me. I thought we had a good opening on perspectives on grand challenges and the importance of some really good engagement models to identify and prioritize those challenges. We talked about creating focal points to kind of drive that collaboration, not relying just on organic collaboration, but how can we channel it in appropriate areas. There was a good talk about data and ethical frameworks as important areas of transdisciplinary examples, and we spoke about competitive processes and how you need to build in the incentives and rely on that hard work of creating those partnerships, but also have it incentivized and even a requirement. A good conversation on culture and the importance of rewards and recognition for collaborative behaviors. We had another good foray into the importance of building for the future, resilience and sustainability, and being forward compatible in whatever we're building, and that we build it and we maximize use of it, including the sharing when it's no longer needed. And a good concluding session on skills for collaboration. How do you create the magnets or the capabilities to really drive that collaboration forward? So it was a rich discussion. My sincere thanks to Dominica for joining us from abroad, and to our panelists in person, Roseanne and Francis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.